to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Maria Jessop. She is a Senior Program Officer in the United States Institute of Peace's Academy for International Conflict Management and Peacebuilding. Ms. Jessop develops and implements education and training programs in conflict resolution, intergroup dialogue, peacebuilding, human rights, and civic education, primarily for Iraqi educators, civil society leaders, and government officials. Ms. Jessop has also trained peacekeepers in Rwanda, Senegal, Tanzania, Afghanistan, and Kosovo. Prior to her current position at USIP, Ms. Jessop contracted as a mediator, trainer, and cross-cultural specialist with organizations in New York, LA, Puerto Rico, and Costa Rica. She has also served as manager of the Office of the Mohammed Saeed Farsi Chair of Islamic Peace at American University, where she led and founded the Dialogue Development Group. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Maria Jessop.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank ICD and Mark Donfried for this very gracious invitation. I am really more of a facilitator and trainer than a lecturer, so this is a little bit of an awkward setting for me. And I'm just wondering right now, is anybody feeling really stiff? Do you need to stand up for half a second and stretch so you don't fall asleep, or are you doing okay?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, you're good. Yeah, while you're talking? Okay, good. I just want to tell you a little bit about where I come from in terms of approaching the topic of dialogue. The theme really is to talk about dialogue as more of a practical tool rather than a sort of just one of these floating concepts. Dialogue sometimes gets a bad rap. It is sometimes seen as a waste of time, or it's seen as not going anywhere. There have been in the literature sort of a host of sort of bad dialogue programs where they just weren't seen as quite very effective. So everybody's wondering, is dialogue worth it? Is dialogue really something that we should spend time on? And I mean, I spent time studying dialogue, both the theory and the practice. I've had the opportunity to try it out in different contexts. And needless to say, I'm a firm believer that it is a practice that is well worth learning and developing and cultivating, and that it is both a mindset and a tool, a practical tool for talking across differences, for communicating across differences, bridging divides. A couple of days ago at the Institute, I don't know if you're not familiar with the Institute, I'll just say a couple of words about that. The U.S. Institute of Peace was founded about 26 years ago by Congress, and our mission is to help prevent and resolve international conflict. And we do that through a number of vehicles. And one of the main ones is through training and education, and we have an academy at the Institute where we teach courses on dialogue, conflict resolution, various things. So since I forgot to bring the material, I encourage you to visit our website and find out more about those courses and come to them. But very often we host delegations from various countries at the Institute to come by and talk about peace building and things like that. And just a few days ago, we hosted a delegation from Egypt. These were a group of women who are engaged in, who are civil society leaders. They are also entrepreneurs. And they were in the United States for several weeks, hosted by State Department and also the Bush Institute. And making the rounds all across the United States and meeting with various organizations. And we had they asked for some training, so we gave them an hour session on dialogue, which was not nearly adequate enough, but it highlighted some of, I think, what are the challenges and hopes of dialogue across differences. Like virtually every group that I've trained or facilitated dialogue with in different parts of the world, they already knew what dialogue was. Everybody instinctively knows that it's about communications, it's about exchange of ideas. Anywhere I go, I always start a training session with the sentence like, what does dialogue mean to you? Or how is it different from conversation? What does it mean to be really in dialogue? And people really genuinely, intuitively know it. And with this group, they were saying some surface responses, and then they got to revealing more deeper insights. And one said, it's about values. And I always love it when somebody says something that really speaks to the core of what I'm trying to convey. Because for me, dialogue is different from other types of conversations because it really seeks to go underneath the surface of ideas and opinions to an exploration of values and our experience of those values. It is really not our usual way of conversing. It is rare to talk about values and what in our lives has informed them. It is rarer still to talk about the expression of those values and how they impact those with whom we coexist. We just don't have a language for it often. Later, we had a short dialogue session on the topic that they chose. And when I heard the topic, I was a little taken aback. They said, we want to talk about the status of women under a Muslim Brotherhood regime. And I thought, well, there's a hot topic for you, you know. And I was looking around the room, and I was wondering whether we should go with this topic. And frankly, there was sort of a mixture of facial expressions. Some people were eager, you know, they really just wanted to talk. And other people were apprehensive and looked like they wanted to hide under the table, you know. And then I purposefully didn't look to the side of the room where some of the Institute leadership was because I didn't want them to be shaking their head to me and say, no, no, don't go there. Because for me, this moment where you choose whether to dialogue or not about a topic encapsulates for me what I call the fear and attraction of dialogue. We are attracted to dialogue because we have a deep longing to have conversations that really matter. We want to move beyond the usual platitudes and the intellectual theorizing to a space where our voice is respected and heard, and where we feel safe enough to dare to let the other in. We're attracted to dialogue because we understand deep down that we are all connected. And while we may choose to distance ourselves and isolate because it feels safer, we do not do it because it feels good. If anything, it is a deeply painful experience to be disconnected, to be isolated, to be marginalized. The dialogue circle is a symbol of that connection. It's always there, but we sometimes choose to forget it. It is why, just in my mind, the physical act of gathering in a circle to dialogue fosters our connection to one another. We're afraid of dialogue because our past experience reminds us that too often people don't really listen to what we have to say. Okay? Not in the way we want to be listened to. They listen with the intention of finding flaws in what we're saying. They listen while preparing to rebut. Right? We're afraid to dialogue because sometimes it feels like, oop, things could get out of hand, might explode, right? Oh my God, this is scary, this topic, Muslim Brotherhood, status of women, what could go, you know, what could happen? What if I say something that offends someone unintentionally? What will others from my identity group think of me for talking and meeting with the other? Will I be ostracized? In some places where group relations are polarized to the extreme and there is violence, the thought running through some people's mind is, will I be killed? Dialogue is risky business, and it's something that we need to be prepared to do, particularly when we're using dialogue as a peace-building tool, to rebuild relations between groups who have a deep distrust of one another or a history of subjugating one another, or history of going to war with each other. If one group is a minority, or a poor and fragile state, or comprised of women, then the unequal power dynamics in the dialogue can feel threatening and unsafe to that group. So in order for dialogue to be a practical tool, something that we do that is effective and useful, and not just a floating concept, we have to ask ourselves, how do we make it safe for people to enter dialogue? First, in my view, we have to know and actively uphold the values and principles upon which genuine dialogue is based. Dialogue is not just a conversation. It is a value and principle-based approach to talking about differences as well as commonalities. While the language used to describe dialogue principles can vary, some of the common ones include inclusivity, joint ownership, learning, humanity, a long-term perspective, and all these, I believe that the legitimacy and power of dialogue derives from really upholding these principles in practice. Not just in your head, but in practice. John Dewey said, "Democracy begins in conversation." It's one of my favorite quotes. And at the heart of democracy is the principle of inclusiveness, which is based on the assumption that anyone who has a stake in a situation or problem can be represented or directly involved in addressing it collectively. Underlying the principle of inclusiveness is faith in the ability of a group to come up with its own solutions. And that's what leads to, I believe, more sustainable outcomes from a dialogue. The principle of learning in dialogue manifests, I think, in an openness to sharing, listening to, and learning from each other's views, experiences, and insights. And the assumption is always that each person in the dialogue space has a legitimate view, and through the process of sharing and listening, everyone gains a clearer and expanded picture of reality. Adopting the principle of learning also means opening oneself up to the possibility of being changed by what we hear, creating something new. I mean, one learning that happened in the dialogue with the ladies from Egypt, right away, even though this was a very short dialogue, was one of the women, one of the techniques you use in dialogue is to invite people to share personal experiences around the topic you're dialoguing. So, and this is a way to keep people from just talking in the abstract or talking about what's going on in general, but really to connect on the personal level. So we asked people to talk about what feeling they associated with this topic and what was an experience that explained the feeling they chose. This woman talked about the fact that one of her ancestors, one of her grandfathers, was a founding member of the Muslim Brotherhood. She talked about how she was, she was distressed because the way people think of the Muslim Brotherhood right now is nothing like what her grandfather thought about the Muslim Brotherhood. She felt that there were all sorts of stereotypes about the Muslim Brotherhood that existed that weren't true. They went on to talk about how the Muslim Brotherhood is very fragmented, and there's a lack of cohesion among the group, and so there's creating confusion in people. And in that short space, there was a deeper understanding of her perspective as well as others, and it came because people shared from personal experience, and they were somehow transformed or affected by the fact that that person had been impacted by an experience. That's the key, I think, to successful dialogue, getting people to talk on a really personal level about the topic. It's important for there to be transparency in dialogue. There can't be hidden agendas. It's not going to be accepted. It's not going to work. The currency of dialogue is trust. You do everything possible to increase trust and keep trust of the group. Some practitioners have used the word humanity to describe another core principle of dialogue, and explaining like learning the humanity of dialogue processes helps it differentiate it from other processes. So, you know, in our normal conversations, because we spent how many years and decades in formal education, right? Where we are taught to analyze and talk about other people's ideas and regurgitate those ideas and so forth, and talk in a certain framework, we lose the ability to really sometimes connect on a more human level. We think that deep conversation is all about intellectualizing about a subject. But deep conversation that really changes attitudes or opens up space for other experiences and perceptions has to happen at the level of human experience. Conversations around experiences and expressions of those values. Dialogue also needs to be authentic. That's the other problem I have with intellectual discourse, that sometimes it feels like it's just, it often is on another plane, and it doesn't feel very authentic or connected to experience or connected to what's going on right here and now. And for it to be authentic in contexts that are different from our own, or different cultural contexts, I think it's very important that you use the values, that you express the values of dialogue in a way that fits with that context. And I'll give you an example. I had the good fortune to work with some Colombian women peacemakers, and this was a great experience. They were faith-based peace builders, and interfaith dialogue was not my specialty, but my colleague's specialty. And they were women who were very much grassroots, working for peace on the community level. Some were Catholic and some were Protestant, and we were bringing them together because they had formed this network. But there was some conflict within the group because Catholicism being the majority religion in Colombia, and Protestant being a very small minority, there were some power dynamics that had occurred in the group, and they were not really getting along that well or being that productive, even though they were lovely women and they were, committed to doing good things for their community. The Catholic women very often were, to some extent, imposing, because they had greater power, enjoyed greater power in the society, greater access to the leadership, religious leadership, and the church and the church's place in Colombian society, they tended to impose some of their ideas on the Protestant women. And it was only through a process of dialogue where we gave them each a space to talk about their own values, their own definitions of peace, their own ways of helping their communities, and then to bring them together to share those values, those different values and ways of looking at peace, that they could really work well together. Another way that we honored their own values in their own context is just through the structure of our dialogue process. It was really a dialogue within a training. We were training them to facilitate dialogue at the same time as we were facilitating dialogue among them. I do that a lot at the Institute. I think it's a very effective way of communicating, of getting these principles across, to do it a combination of training and actual dialogue. Anyway, another way we did this was these women, they were very ritualistic. They liked to start each day with a prayer, a song, a dance, or some sort of exercise where they would, bring yarn together, and we'd all be connected by yarn, and we'd dance around, and sometimes we would light candles, sometimes they were extremely oriented towards ritual. And it was a beautiful part of the experience. And if I had just gone and done my regular dialogue practice that I might do here in the US, it just wouldn't have fit there. And what what made it work there was because we let them express the values of dialogue, which is really about connection, but in their own way, in their own cultural context. And then we also then benefited from this exchange. It wasn't just merely us facilitating a dialogue among them, and we were enriched by the experience as well, because they helped to shape it. I learned, especially from my experience with these women, that we bring our whole selves to dialogue. We don't bring just our minds and our opinions. We bring our hearts, our spiritual beliefs, our secrets, our hidden fears and our hidden hurts, and our hidden hopes. While not all dialogue initiatives have a long-term focus, dialogue aims at long-term change. And in order for us to really have dialogue for long-term change, we need to learn how to do it, learn the practice. And it sounds like self-serving because I teach dialogue at the Institute and I want everybody to take my course. But the fact is, I think that we can really improve the perception of dialogue and the practice of dialogue if we get serious about how we do it. And we don't take it for granted that by just putting people together in a room and, you know, serving cookies and coffee, that everything will work. It can actually sometimes make things worse to just bring people together who have a history of conflict, because they're not prepared to dialogue. You are not prepared to help them dialogue. And then they're frustrated. They can leave frustrated. So I'm going to leave at that, and we'll open up for questions. Thank you very much.